Hey, hey, Disney fans, planners, and reluctant visitors. I'm Becky, and this is Touring Plans Teaches. This week, we have Walt Disney World Resorts episode 301, where we're going to start talking about DVC, Disney Vacation Club. Now, don't tune out immediately if this isn't something that you've bought into or plan on buying into, because there's other ways to stay at these very cool resorts that we're going to talk about in this and future episodes. We probably need to start by talking about what DVC is. So Disney's Vacation Club is essentially Disney's version of a timeshare. You buy into a decades-long contract, you pay a lot of money up front, but then for the life of that contract, you can use points that you've purchased to book resort reservations instead of money out of pocket. Now, it's not free. Once you've paid that big chunk of money up front, you still have to pay annual dues or fees depending on the number of points you own. But it does decrease the cost somewhat compared to staying at deluxe resorts every year. So this is very popular with a lot of people. But even if you don't purchase DVC yourself, there are still ways that you can stay at these resorts. So for me and my family, we tend to rent DVC points. So when a DVC owner has too many points, they can't use them in a year, they don't use them, they might go to waste, or they can rent them out to someone else like you or me. So you entered into a contract just to rent out the certain number of points that you need to take a vacation at one of these resorts. And that can be a pretty good deal. We'll talk about all the details of how to do that in a future episode. But you can also pay out of pocket. This typically isn't a great value, but if you work with a Disney travel agent or even go through Disney's website, you can buy your way into these resorts just like any other Disney resort. So it's good to know what they are in case you think you might want to stay at one on your next trip. Before we hop into our resort by resort introduction, we need to talk about the different room types that are available at DVC resorts, because they're very different than what you'll find at Disney's regular resorts. And many of these will get you a lot more space and can fit a lot more people in a single room for a lot more money. Your studios at DVC resorts are very typical normal hotel rooms. They might be a little bit bigger, some of them might feel more cramped, but this is what you're going to be used to if you've stayed at regular Disney resorts before. So they're going to sleep 4 or 5 people. It's all one big room with a bathroom, but studios also have a kitchenette, which can be an added bonus, especially for families. As you move up, things get more expensive, but you get more space. So those 1-bedroom villas have a separate bedroom and then a living area and a full kitchen. They still only sleep 4 to 5 people, so you're not generally getting more sleeping surfaces by doing a 1-bedroom, but you do get that full kitchen and 2 separate rooms in case the parents want to stay up later, or you have a few people staying that are going to different parks and waking up at different times. It grants you a little more flexibility that way. 2 bedrooms are where things start getting crazy. Sometimes these are just a studio and a 1-bedroom combined. Those are called lock-offs. Or you have a 2-bedroom dedicated villa, and those will have much more space for you. So you'll have the 2 bedrooms plus the living room and the kitchen, and you get 2 bathrooms at this point. So these generally fit 9 or 10 people, and you have more space to get ready in the morning and in the evenings. And then finally, at the top of the scale, we have the grand villas. These have 3 bedrooms plus the main living area. Typically, there's a separate dining area, that full kitchen. You get 4 bathrooms, tons of sleeping space. Usually they sleep 12 people. These are really, really expensive, but the nicest places you can stay. Other than these 4 room types, there are a few unique room types at a couple of the resorts, but we'll cover those at the resorts where they're located. There are 3 DVC resorts that are only DVC resorts, so they don't have a deluxe counterpart. They were custom built just for this purpose. We're going to talk about all of those first. And the OG DVC resort is Old Key West. It opened way back in the 90s and was originally called the Disney Vacation Club Resort before Disney figured out they needed more than just one of them and then converted it and called it Old Key West. It's really spread out. So Old Key West is themed off of Key West, imagine that, and it's a bunch of 2- and 3-story buildings spread out sort of subdivision style around a golf course and a creek. Really relaxed, not huge buildings, very quiet, laid-back type of area. So a lot of people treat this as their home resort, especially if they've been part of Disney Vacation Club for a really long time. Old Key West is really large, so there are 761 available villas, and they're spread out across 49 different buildings. So you've got a lot of different places that you could stay. Because it's so spread out, you've also got 4 different pools that you can choose from, the main one and then 3 quiet ones. You've got 3 different bus stops, but a lot of people at Old Key West drive their own cars. You also have your own table service restaurant that's called Olivia's Cafe. It gets pretty high satisfaction scores, but the counter service spots and the poolside bars, those sort of snack stands, don't get very good satisfaction scores at Old Key West. You might want to stay away from those. And there's also one bar on property that's called the Gurgling Suitcase, and it's pretty popular with people that frequent Old Key West. Old Key West is going to be the cheapest option out of any DVC resort. It's the original, and you're going to be spending the least amount of points if you want to stay there. So typically a pretty good economical option. Our next DVC resort is also the next cheapest option, and that's Saratoga Springs. Saratoga Springs is the largest DVC resort. There are 1,320 different villas spread across 18 buildings. And its sort of claim to fame is that it's closest to Disney Springs. You can take a boat there, you can actually walk there, and if you've been to Disney Springs before, you've probably seen Saratoga Springs across the water and might not have noticed. Another cool thing about Saratoga Springs is that there are 60 tree houses that you can choose from. This is one of those special room types that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Tree houses are sort of in the trees, that makes sense, and there's basically circular rooms. They have 3 different bedrooms. 2 of those bedrooms have a queen bed each. The 3rd bedroom has a set of bunk beds. And then in the living room, there's a sofa bed and a chair bed. So they sleep a lot of people, but their square footage isn't very big. You're really paying for the uniqueness. They're very tucked away, really quiet, but part of that Saratoga Springs resorts. So if you want a tree house, a cool place for quite a few people to spend time together, that's a cool option that you get to choose from. Saratoga Springs is another one of these sprawling resorts. And as a result, there's 4 different pools that you can choose from, each with a slightly different theme. There are 5 different bus stops. 2 of those are in the tree houses. There are 2 boat launches, one in the tree houses and one in the regular resort, that take you to Disney Springs. And then you have to rely on bus transportation to get you to all of the other parks. Saratoga Springs has 1 table service restaurant, that's called the Turf Club. They have 2 or more counter service restaurants, depending on how you define those, and also 2 different bars that you can choose from if you stay there. Those first 2 resorts that we talked about were the very cheapest. Now we're going to the opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to talk about Riviera Resort, which is the newest DVC resort, and it opened in late 2019, very late 2019. And we all know what happened in 2020, so Riviera still has that bright, shiny, new feel to it, and should for at least another couple of years. It's themed to the glamorous resort areas in the south of France, and unlike Old Key West and Saratoga Springs, it's all in one large 9-story building. And from the top levels of that building, you can easily see Epcot and Hollywood Studios, so it's a really cool location. It's also really fancy, which means really expensive. So the 1-bedroom villas, specifically at Riviera Resort, are the most expensive 1-bedrooms that you'll find anywhere at Walt Disney World. And every other room type at Riviera is either the 2nd or the 3rd most expensive of its type. So you're going to be paying a lot to stay in the bright, shiny new place. But that comes with its advantages and its perks. So you have Topolino's Terrace at the very top of Riviera Resort. They have an excellent character brunch, my favorite on property, and a really fancy dinner, and you're up at the top of the resort so you can see fireworks from there, you can see over Caribbean Beach, you can see the Skyliner moving, all really cool things, says a lot about Topolino's Terrace. You also have excellent counter service choices and a bar at your disposal. One thing that's not so excellent about Riviera Resort is the new room type they debuted there, called the Tower Studio. So the Tower Studio will look really cheap on a point chart, but that's because it only sleeps 2 people, and it's 255 square feet. So really, really, really tiny. In fact, it's small enough that you have to fold the bed up when you're not sleeping in the bed. Otherwise, you can't move around the room. So you've got enough room for about a bed, a TV, and a bathroom. And then they give you a nice little veranda because otherwise you might go stir crazy. I don't think anyone ever anywhere recommends the Tower Studio. So if it looks tempting just based on the number of points that it costs, run far away. You don't want to do that. But otherwise, Riviera Resort is a great place to explore, to visit, or to stay. There's tons of recreation. It's a great place to spend a resort day if that's where you're staying. Now we're going to move on from those DVC-only resorts and start talking about the other ones that are integrated with deluxe resorts. We're going to start at our lodges, and specifically at Animal Kingdom Lodge. Animal Kingdom Lodge is the place to stay if you're an animal lover or your kids are. You have the savannas out the back of both resorts, and you can have animals outside your room or on that big porch in the morning. I'm trying not to be biased because this is my personal favorite resort, and that's where I want to stay. It also has really great food options. So between the two resort areas, Kidani Village and Jambo House, you have Jiko, Boma, and Sana'a. Those are 3 restaurants that score in the top 10 of all table service restaurants for all of Walt Disney World, and they're at this one resort. So if that's something that's important to you, you should take that into consideration and maybe think about booking Animal Kingdom Lodge. Now, I mentioned that there are 2 different resort areas, Kidani Village, which is the dedicated DVC portion of Animal Kingdom Lodge, and Jambo House. Jambo House was actually built first, and it was a deluxe resort, and then they converted some of the rooms to DVC when demand got really high. This yields some unique things about Jambo House. Kidani was built to feel very home-like. It's your DVC home away from home, so it's smaller and more intimate. Jambo is big and bold, like most of the deluxe resorts, and it already offered club-level concierge rooms. So this is something you can find at a lot of the deluxe resorts, but no other DVC resort offers it. So this is the only place where you can stay with DVC points and still be concierge and have access to that lounge and to the other perks that come with that. Besides the animals, you have 2 really cool pools that you can choose from at Animal Kingdom Lodge. You're welcome to use both of them, no matter whether you're at Kidani or Jambo. And you have those excellent restaurants to choose from as well, plus counter service and a bar. One thing to keep in mind is that the point charts for Kidani and Jambo are exactly the same. So you're going to be paying the same at the same room type no matter which one you're staying at. But their rooms aren't created equal. So for everything other than Grand Villas, Kidani is significantly larger. So if you want more room for your points, that's the place to request. But the Grand Villas, on the other hand, at Jambo are much bigger. So if you're staying in that really fancy, expensive room, maybe you want to opt for Jambo. Most of the restaurants are also at Jambo House. Sana'a is the only one that's at Kidani Village, and so you might have to walk or shuttle back and forth. There are 2 different bus stops. They share on that same loop. Typically, they pick up from Jambo first and then Kidani. So if you're busing to the parks and that's your only transportation option at Animal Kingdom Lodge, you might have to share buses. You might have to wait a loop or 2 before you get one to pick you up. Next, we're going to talk about the 2 different DVC options at Wilderness Lodge. So Animal Kingdom Lodge, one of the cheaper DVC options. It's usually the 3rd cheapest after Old Key West and Saratoga Springs. Wilderness Lodge, a little bit opposite of that. They tend to be slightly above average, both options here. First one is Boulder Ridge. Boulder Ridge is a custom-built addition to Wilderness Lodge, so it's a little bit of a separate building, and it was meant just for DVC. There are 181 villas in this one building, so that's pretty small. It's not the smallest DVC resort, but it's not sprawling. You can get to everything pretty quickly. However, Boulder Ridge doesn't have as high of satisfaction scores as Wilderness Lodge itself, or as the other DVC option that we'll talk about next. So there's not a lot to recommend here. There are no Grand Villas. It does have its own dedicated pool, but you have to walk over to the main building to get access to dining. It shares all of its dining with Wilderness Lodge, and it shares its transportation too. So if you want a little more space and to be separated out from the main building, that could be a reason to choose Boulder Ridge, but otherwise the satisfaction scores are low enough that it makes more sense to stay at Wilderness Lodge itself or our next option. That next option is Copper Creek. So these tend to be slightly cheaper than Boulder Ridge, and they have higher satisfaction scores. So if you're looking to stay DVC at Wilderness Lodge, this is probably the way to go, but do your own math and analysis with the help of a Disney travel agent. Copper Creek is part of the Wilderness Lodge main building. So if you want to stay in a villa, part of Copper Creek, you're going to be in a wing of the main building of Wilderness Lodge. So there are 194 villas inside that main building. But in addition, the cool part of Copper Creek are the Cascade cabins. So there's 26 Cascade cabins, and these are on the edge of the lake. So at the very far parts of Wilderness Lodge, you're going to be really quiet. Some of them have great views at the Magic Kingdom. They're also a little bit bigger, so they're sort of equivalent to a 2-bedroom villa. They have this 2 separate bedrooms, they have 2 baths, and you have a sofa bed and a chair bed, so you can fit more people in there, and they have a little over 1,200 square feet. So you have space for these people to spread out. But really you're paying for the separate location, the cool views, these accommodations that you're not going to find at other resorts. Now, no matter whether you're in the cabins or in the main building itself, you're sharing everything with Wilderness Lodge. You're sharing the dining options, which are pretty great. You're sharing transportation, and you're sharing that main pool. So there's no really separate areas for Copper Creek. After the lodges, we're going to move on to the monorail loop and talk about the DVC resorts that are around the Magic Kingdom. Obviously, none of these are originally DVC, because the Contemporary, the Polynesian, and the Grand Floridian were all built as deluxe resorts and then had DVC sort of tacked on whenever Disney decided that they needed more DVC capacity. The first one that we'll talk about is Bay Lake Tower. So this is the DVC partner to Contemporary Resort. And Bay Lake Tower is really popular and relatively expensive. You're going to be spending more points here than at a lot of other resorts. It's also really big. So you have one main tower outside of the main tower of the Contemporary and has 428 villas in it. It has a lot to recommend it. A lot of people love the top of the world bar, so it's not the very top of that tower. Excellent place to view fireworks because this is the closest resort building to the Magic Kingdom. So it's even closer than the main tower of the Contemporary Resort. And it's a pretty quick walk into the Magic Kingdom as well. So you can get some excellent views at some of these rooms and from that top of the world bar. But you don't have much dedicated capacity in Bay Lake Tower for any amenities. It does have its own pool, but otherwise you're going to have to go to the main Contemporary building for most other things like dining and transportation, buses, the monorail loop if you want to use it. Thankfully, there's an outdoor covered walkway. It's a little bit elevated, so you're not just walking out in the elements if you happen to go during Florida monsoon season. But Bay Lake Tower, really popular for a lot of reasons, mostly its location. Next, we're going to talk about the Polynesian Villas. The Polynesian is a really unique DVC resort for a few reasons. One is that you can only choose studios or bungalows if you stay at the Polynesian, for now. They're actually building a new tower in between the Polynesian and the Grand Floridian to increase DVC capacity here. I suspect that will introduce more room types, but that's not coming for a number of years. So for now, you can choose from one of the 360 studios that are in 3 buildings at the Polynesian: Moorea, Tokelau, and Pago Pago. So that's a lot of studios. They're really big. They have a nice bathroom setup. And they recently got a soft goods refurbishment, so new towels, bedding, etc. Really nice place to stay. Or you can choose the bungalows. So similar to those Cascade cabins that we talked about at Wilderness Lodge, bungalows are out on the water. They're meant to be like Fiji or Tahiti, somewhere where you can stay over the tropical waters in the actual Polynesian. And they're the most expensive room type on all of Walt Disney World's property. You're going to be paying the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars a night to stay in them because you're out over the water of the lagoon and you have an excellent view of Magic Kingdom. You can see fireworks at night, the castle during the day, all the boat traffic going back and forth. But really, these bungalows are not a great value. They're unique. There's still a lot of demand for them, but they're smaller than those Cascade cabins by quite a bit. They're less than 1,100 square feet, and they're still supposed to sleep just as many people. So you've got the 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and then the sleeper sofa and some more sleeping arrangements in the living room. Hard to recommend the bungalows unless you've got a lot of cash burning a hole in your pocket. They're pretty cool for what they are. Everything at the Polynesian DVC Resort is shared with the Polynesian Resort itself, so you're sharing transportation, boat dock, monorail loop, buses, and you're also sharing all the cool dining options, pools, and bars there. We'll finish out our tour of the monorail loop with the Villas at Grand Floridian. The Villas at Grand Floridian is the smallest DVC resort for now, and that for now is coming to an end very shortly because they're opening up an entire new building in what was formerly Big Pine Key in June 2022. So this video will be posting also in June 2022, so we'll see what that additional capacity does. It'll probably be the second smallest and no longer the smallest. But for now, there are only 147 villas in one building at the Villas at Grand Floridian. This makes it either the first or second most expensive across all room types for any of the other DVC resorts. It's really hard to get into a villa at the Grand Floridian. The good news is it has the satisfaction to match. People really love it when they do get to stay there. It doesn't have any of its own dedicated amenities. It shares all of its pools, dining, and transportation with the Grand Floridian. So if you like it there, you'll probably like it at the villas as well. We're going to wrap things up with our 2 DVC resorts that are along Crescent Lake. And the first one are the Boardwalk Villas. The Boardwalk Villas are pretty average in price. They're not as cheap as Old Key West, Saratoga, or Animal Kingdom Lodge, but not as expensive as the Wilderness Lodge resorts or Grand Floridian or Bay Lake Tower. Nice sweet spot right in the middle. There's also 2 buildings here, so there are 532 villas spread across those 2 buildings. The north building is the one that you'll want to stay in if you want views of Crescent Lake and if you want a really quick walk to Epcot. But the south building is a little quieter, more secluded, and closer to Hollywood Studios. So you can technically walk to both parks from Boardwalk Villas, but depending on which building you choose, you'll be closer to one than the other and might save yourself a few steps. The Boardwalk Villas share all of their amenities with the Boardwalk Inn, so you don't have any dedicated dining or transportation for the villas themselves. You'll have to walk over to Boardwalk Inn to access all of those. And our last DVC resort is the Beach Club Villas. The Beach Club Villas are going to run slightly more expensive than the Boardwalk Villas, although they're pretty comparable. And one thing to keep in mind about the Beach Club Villas is that there are no grand villas, so you're only going to be choosing from studios, 1 bedrooms, or 2 bedrooms. Beach Club Villas is one of the more petite resorts. It has 282 villas in one building. The one building doesn't have a really spectacular location. It's sort of sandwiched between Beach Club itself and Beach Club's parking lot. So you're not going to get those great lake views, but you do get access to Stormalong Bay, which is the pool that Beach Club and Yacht Club share. And so this is a big draw. Lots of people love to spend their DVC points staying at Beach Club Villas. You do have access to Epcot or Hollywood Studios by walking, in addition to that pool, but otherwise you're sharing transportation, dining, etc. with Beach Club itself. Now that we've talked about all of the resorts, let's compare across each specific room type to see the differences that might influence where you want to pick to stay on your next vacation. We'll start with the studios, which again are the smallest room type. This is where everything's all in one room, like a normal hotel room, except you get a little kitchenette, which is helpful. All of these studios either sleep 4 or 5 people, and we're seeing as rooms get renovated, they almost always add that 5th sleeper in. So if you're watching this a few weeks or months or years after it gets posted, some of these 4s might get converted to 5s because Disney is liking to do that, which is helpful. If you see that 5, though, it's always either a sleeper chair, so not a sleeper sofa, just the sleeper chair, or a pull-down Murphy bed. And that's really child size. You're not often going to want to put an adult in any of these fifth sleepers, so keep that in mind when you're figuring out for your party type where you might be comfortable. We see a few things on this chart. The first is that Jumbo has a range of square feet where everyone else just has one number. Jumbo actually has some value studios, which are even smaller than the regular studios. And so those value studios are the smallest studios on property, and you're going to be pretty cramped in those, but they are a good point value. Otherwise, Copper Creek and Bay Lake Tower have the smallest studio rooms, and the Polynesian has the biggest. But that comes at a cost because the Polynesian also has the most expensive studios, so you're paying more for that space. And we know that Riviera has the second most expensive studios and the second most space. So we're going to see that trade-off happens a lot between point cost and square footage. Next, we'll move on up in the square footage to our one-bedroom villas. You'll notice here that it sleeps the same number of people, or sometimes even at the same resort, the one bedroom will only sleep 4 people when the studio sleeps 5. So keep a close eye on this. If you have 5 people in your party or 2 kids that like separate sleeping surfaces, that happens in my family, you'll want to know whether it sleeps 4 or 5 if that impacts your decision between a studio and a one bedroom. For all of these, the extra space that you're getting is almost always going to that dedicated kitchen area, and then you have the living room that has the sofa bed and potentially that 5th sleeper. For the one-bedroom villas, Old Key West wins on space by far, and it's also the cheapest one-bedroom villa on property. So sort of the opposite from what we saw at the studios, the cheapest is also the biggest. In fact, you can fit almost 1.5 of the Copper Creek one-bedroom villas inside the Old Key West one-bedroom villas. So there's a big wide range here, and once again, Jumbo has some of those value one-bedroom villas that are much, much smaller than the other ones. So if you don't mind not having the extra space, you can save a lot of money or points by getting one of those. Next, we're going to keep moving to our 2-bedroom villas. Now, at most resorts, you can combine a studio and a 1-bedroom to make a 2-bedroom. That's essentially what they are. On this screen, we're showing the 2-bedroom that are dedicated. So these are never split into a studio and a 1-bedroom. These are custom built to be 2-bedroom villas. And we see, again, a lot of variation in the square footage on these, and they sleep either 8 or 9 people. The 8 only happens at Copper Creek. And here we see that the Old Key West 1-bedroom on the previous slide is roughly equivalent to the square footage of the Copper Creek 2-bedroom. So there's lots of squished space in Copper Creek and a lot of room to relax at Old Key West. Old Key West has the biggest 2-bedroom villa, and it's also the cheapest 2-bedroom villa. So if you want more space for your points, Old Key West is the obvious winner. And finally, we have our Grand Villas, and this is finally where Old Key West doesn't win. Grand Floridian and Riviera Resort actually have the biggest Grand Villas, but they are also the 2 most expensive Grand Villas. This is a huge amount of space, lots of places for 12 people to sleep and spread out. Again, though, some of these sleeping surfaces are those small sleeping surfaces. Don't expect to fit 12 adults comfortably in these, but if you have a mixed party, grandparents, parents, kids, something like that, a grand villa might be a way for you all to spend time together. Now we've covered the quick tour of all of the DVC resorts. I hit a little bit on theme and room types and price and satisfaction, but in the next 2 weeks we're going to go into a little bit more detail. So next week we'll talk about price, probably in points, versus satisfaction. And so where are you going to get the most value for your points or your money? And the week after that, we're going to talk about how to rent DVC points if you're not a DVC owner but are interested in staying in one of these resorts, because that's typically the most economical way of doing it. Thanks for joining me this week, and I'll talk to you.